What did the parachute cost?
Well, I bought a used chute, $35. It had a lot of patches in it.
Oh my God, that seems like a bad idea.
I thought so too. Well, I asked the guy, what if it, is this guaranteed? What if it doesn't work? He said, if it doesn't work, bring it back. You don't have to pay for it.
Welcome to another edition of Boast About It. I'm with Doug Garr, who is, Doug, you've written...
I've authored or co-authored 7 books.
7 books. You've been on all of the network televisions.
Yes.
And so now on Boast About It, you've completed all of them.
I feel like this is the hat trick.
We first started playing squash together a long time ago. You used to crush me.
Yeah, well...
I'm happy to say that doesn't happen anymore.
Well, you see, this is what happened. You quickly got to the 4.0 level, and I've been a perennial 3.3 to 3.7, depending on my physical condition. And the difference is that I knew more about it. And as soon as you learn the game, I said to myself, once he figures out where the ball lands and it hits 3 walls, you'll be fine.
You play some interesting sports, because you don't just play squash, right? Mm-hmm. You started as a student athlete in a very different sport. Tell us about that.
I wasn't really good at sports as a young boy and then in 9th grade, I got interested in amateur wrestling because my school had a very good wrestling team, and my brother went to a college that had a really good wrestling team, and I had seen actual crowds at wrestling matches. My gym teacher, when he saw me fumbling around on a basketball court, pulled me over and he said, "You should, you're a scrawny little kid. You should probably do something like wrestle, try a sport like that, or gymnastics." So in 9th grade, I wrote our high school coach a letter saying I want to come up and work out with the team. My brother induced me to write this letter. And interestingly enough, he never answered the letter, but for some reason, I just wangled my way up to the wrestling room to start wrestling. And 10 years later, he sent me the letter I wrote to him back. He had kept the letter, and I said, "How did you know?" He said, "Sometimes you know when someone's going to really be the real deal and stay with it." So I had a nice career, and I got a wrestling scholarship to college, which led me down the path I am now. So
you got to the state finals.
Yeah.
I think you said. You told me what your record was. What was your record?
Well, my senior year record was 22-1.
22 wins
and 1 loss. Yeah, and my 2 teammates were 23-0. They were both state champions, and we had one other guy that was in 3rd place. So we walked away with the team title for the 2nd year in a row.
So sports came been an important part of your life.
Yes.
So let's go back a little bit. How did you first get into squash? How long have you been playing for?
I've been playing for, holy mackerel, late 70s. So I have a 50 year.
So you've probably been playing for longer than most of our audience has been alive.
Yeah. The better part of my story is how I first picked up a racket.
Tell us.
It was the late 70s, and I had a friend who had a column in the Village Voice. And he was always looking for ideas to write stories. So there was a squash club that opened up in the building around the corner from the public library that slants.
The Grace Building.
The Grace Building.
Yes.
So meanwhile, my friend at the Village Voice said, I need an idea to do a story, and the idea I came up with was I'm going to play squash at this new place that opened in the Grace Building. He said, "You want to come and hit the ball around with me?" Yeah, why not? So the 2 of us got out there, and man, we looked really stupid. And a rally of 2 strokes or 3 strokes was a miracle. But I sort of said, this looks like fun. He went back, wrote a story, and never got on a court again. I got hooked. The fitness part attracted me first, because I don't like to go to the gym. If I'm on a squash court 3 days a week, I got my cardiovascular. The rest of it is, as the coaches will say, you get older, you're losing muscle tone, you got to do a little bit more weight stuff.
Do you do weights too?
Yeah, here and there, but not as disciplined as I was when I was in high school, and I knew I had to work out in the off season before wrestling started. I had to, be in the weight room. In fact, I was maniacal back then.
Now, you know, just because, you know, squash is a fairly extreme sport. You have to be very fit to play it, but squash is not the most extreme sport you participate in, my friend.
You had to go there.
I have to go there. Tell us, what is the most extreme sport that you do?
I've been an active skydiver now for a long time, and I now have 2,333 jumps, exactly.
2,333 jumps.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Exactly.
When was the first time you were such an enormous idiot that you decided to jump out of a plane?
Enormous idiot would be an understatement. It was March of '69. I was a
Oh,
sophomore.
you've been doing it a long time.
Yeah, well, I had a big gap though. I stopped for 25 years. So I jumped for 14 years, stopped for 25, and then I came back in 2008, 9, 10. What happened was in 1969, I was writing for the college newspaper. I was just starting to make this adjustment that maybe I could make my living selling words someday. And we had a crazy roommate that was a skydiving instructor, which is too long to go into. He kept saying, if you ever want to write about skydiving, let me know. So this was a little tease. And I said, yeah, I'll come down, I'll watch you, I'll take notes. And he said, well, you should come down and maybe make a jump. I said, no, I don't want to make a jump. I'll write about it. He goes, if you really want to write about it, you got to make a jump. So I kept putting it off. Finally, I said, the only way to shut this guy up and write a piece for the Daily Orange, my college paper, is to go down there and try it. So I go down there, and my best friend from grade school is with me. I go through all the training to do a static line jump as they do in the military. And it was really weird because right before I got in the plane,
A static line jump is one where
you
your
get
chute
hooked up and your chute automatically opens.
Yeah.
And nowadays they have advanced free fall techniques where you can go out and you have tandem jumping where you can experience free fall with an instructor on your back. But back then it was very primitive. We only had round canopies, jump boots. We had a reserve that was over here. You look like a military jumper when you were making a sport jump. I said to my friend Richard, I said, look, if something bad really happens, you can keep the car and my stereo. Those are my only two, possessions. And he said, Doug, don't worry about it. You're going to be fine. So I go up, I make this jump, and I land in the landing area. And when I landed, I rolled over on my back and I started laughing hysterically. It's not that it's funny, it's that you're releasing all this adrenaline tension that you've had. You were so nervous, you know, why am I doing this? I'm going to die, blah, blah, blah. You know, when I rolled over and I had this hysterical laugh, but then it was like, I got to do this again. It was like I was on such a high. The following weekend, I made 2 more jumps, and that Monday I bought a parachute. I said, this is for me.
What did the parachute cost?
Well, I bought a used chute, $35. It had a lot of patches in it.
Oh my God, that seems like a bad idea.
I thought so too. Well, I asked the guy, what if it, is this guaranteed? What if it doesn't work? He said, if it doesn't work, bring it back. You don't have to pay for it. The hardest jump is the second one because you're getting in the plane. You go, wait a minute, I just cheated death. I just proved I could do this. Why am I doing this again?
You participated in some jump records, wasn't there?
Yeah, I was in age group records. We have over 60 skydivers and over 70 skydivers. I was in a world record formation for over 60s. And in December, I was in the biggest formation, not a record, but and not an age group record, but a personal record. I was in 101 formation skydive, which is, getting 100-way patch is a real...
Is that where everyone holds hands?
Yeah.
101
yeah.
What's the world record on?
400. And
Wow.
a couple of the people that were on my jump had been in the 400-way.
Have you had an emergency situation?
I've had 5 reserve rides.
5 reserve. That's
Five
times.
five
where
times
the
I had
main
to-
chutes failed, and you've had to rip the emergency.
Yeah.
That must put your heart in your throat.
The first 2 were heart thumpers. The other 3 were pretty routine. I have to admit, when you've cut, by the 3rd, 4th, and 5th, I had come back to the sport. I had no issues with, I didn't get down on the ground and go, wow, that was a close one, I could have died. I'm not saying it's routine, but knowing what to do has to become routine when your parachute doesn't open. But there are so many other things that could go wrong that I've actually written about in the Association magazine about how to look for the little things that'll go wrong that could be a disaster. because disasters usually occur not because of one thing. It's a string of little things that go wrong.
So
and if
true.
you take one thing out of the equation, a disaster could have been averted. So
Well, let's segue out of that into your professional career, because
Right.
as you said, we were talking before, you've really had sort of three parts to your professional career. You're a journalist. Why don't we start by how you became a journalist in college?
Totally by accident. I was on freshman year on my floor. I had a big floor of like 45 other freshmen. And there was a guy on our floor who was really a kind of low-key animated guy named Bobby Kelton. Bobby said to me, why don't you go down to the Daily Orange and write a story for the Daily Orange? I said, I don't know X, Y from Z from writing. And he said, well, it's something to do. So I go down to the Daily Orange and I figure, because I like sports, I'll knock on the sports editor's door. And I knock on his door and I say, Bobby Kelton writes for you, and he said I should come down and write for the Daily Orange. Mike Greenstein, I'll never forget it. He interviews me and he said, well, what do you want to write about? I said, well, I don't know. And Syracuse had a really good top-level lacrosse team at the time. They were playing my friend Richard's team, Hobart, an hour away by bus, on the road in a week. And my friend Richard, who was my second from my first parachute jump, he goes, why don't you come over for the weekend and visit with me? And you know, I didn't have a car. I said, oh, maybe I could write a story about the Syracuse-Hobart lacrosse game, because that would be like a Michigan-Notre Dame football game. Only 50 people are going to be watching instead of 50,000. So Greenstein asked me this question. Did you write for your high school newspaper? Line number one. Oh, yeah. You got any clips? Yeah, but they're back at the dorm. I don't have them with me. Line number two. Then he goes, well, what do you want to do? I said, well, Syracuse playing Hobart. Oh, yeah, we should be covering that. That's a big game. Okay, you get on the bus with Roy Simmons, you know, Hall of Fame coach, this, that, and the other thing. And he goes, cover the game and write the game story when you come back. So I go, great. I walk out of there. I have my first assignment. I get on the bus and I sit next to the coach. So the Hall of Fame coach, I've never written a word for publishing, and I've never even seen a lacrosse game. So I started.
Did you know the rules?
Well, the first question I asked him was, how many guys are on a team? How many guys are on a team? This guy must have looked at me and said, wow, I was hoping we'd have a reporter coming. Yeah. But this guy was a legend, you know? This is like Parsegian at Notre Dame, you know, that equivalent. So I guess the cool thing was I got to the game, I was hanging out with Rich, and I'm taking notes in a notebook and asking questions. I get back on the bus and I got quotes from the coach, went back, wrote the story, and got my first byline. And seeing my name in print was a little bit, you know, addictive. I said, wow, they published my story. Well, I mean, it was somebody, Ira Baseman went back when I told him how I started. He went back into the archives and sent me like 10 stories I'd written for the Daily Orange. He sent me the copies and I started reading them, and I just kept shaking my head and I said, boy, this is really some bad writing.
Well, you got to start somewhere.
But yeah, that's how you learn.
Yeah. So you tried it and you liked it, and then out of college, what did you do?
I went to look for my first job.
And?
So I had written a story about jumping this new parachute that was rectangular. They were just starting to come out. And I sold it to Popular Science magazine. And they had it scheduled for the August issue, and I had a check for like an amazing amount of money, $500. In 1971, that's like $4,000 today. So I thought, that's, you know, I could do this, you know, and it was really kind of cool because at that point on, you know, when my story was being published, I went down to meet the editor-in-chief, and he said, what are you doing right now? I said, a lot of nothing. And he said, we may have an opening someday. And 2 months later, he called me up and he said, I had a job at a weekly newspaper, and I was making $105 a week. When he said, how much are you making? I said, $105 a week. He said, well, would you come here for $175? I went, you want to like almost double my salary? And I go, yeah. And he goes, yeah. I go, I think I'll take the job. I had one good story where I was nominated for a National Magazine Award that I didn't win, but I was very proud of. I did a story on the nuclear waste dump in Hanford, Washington. and where you got to get driven out to the desert, you know, to this remote place where you hope you're going to come back, and you have to wear a bunny suit and a radiometer because it's all like radioactive waste in these big vats. And one of them's actually bubbling, and I wrote a story called Too Hot to Handle. And it was really a good story. I mean, thoroughly reported. There was a lot of protests. People that were downwind were getting sick from cancer from the dump. Very complicated, long story. So that I was very proud of. I think my biggest moment was when my book on IBM came out and it was reviewed in the Sunday Times Book Review. And my agent called me on Friday and said, you're going to be in the review on Sunday. I saw it and I said, well, is it? And she said, it's a rave. I said, thank goodness. She said, well, you know, that's a good start. And that Sunday night, all my relatives were calling me, you know.
What was the book called?
It was called IBM Redux, about the comeback of IBM in 1998. That was, you know, when you get reviewed in the Times Sunday magazine, the Sunday Book Review, it's not going to get much better, you know, because all your friends are going to see it, and agents and whatnot. So that's always good.
And you went from that, we went into politics as well. You were a speechwriter.
Right.
So for Mario Cuomo,
Yeah.
Andrew Cuomo's father,
Yeah.
you got any interesting stories at that? You must have some interesting stories.
You know, Mario Cuomo was a very tough guy and a great guy, but he made us look better than we made him look, because when he got out there, he was the jazz guy improvising. You know, he would read the first 3 pages and then connect, you know, take off the glasses, and the rest of the speech was irrelevant. In fact, when he would mark up the speeches after 6 or 7 pages, he'd get kind of tired and not bother. I had one speech early on that he was doing an economic speech Monday morning in front of bankers. He goes, who's the audience? I said, a lot of bankers. 300. And he goes, 300 bankers. And I go, yeah, probably 297 voted for the other guy. So you're in enemy territory here. And it was a tough speech to write, you know, about economics, the private sector, you know, kind of thing. And Sunday afternoon, the chief of staff calls and he's sort of half laughing. I go, what's so funny? He says, wow, some of these comments on this speech are really vicious, Doug. Do you want to hear them? And I go, yeah, you know, and he's reading me the comments. And they're like, lots of cross-outs, rewrites in the margin. Used to this. The last page, it ends up here, and then there's a scroll at the bottom. And he said, and it said, at the bottom of the speech, it said, this isn't an ending, this is a collapse. And then as the chief of staff's reading this, he goes, you should have seen the governor this morning. He threw all of the copies of the speech up in the air. They were fluttering around the room onto the Franklin Roosevelt desk. And he said, he was really frustrated. He said, can't anybody write a simple declarative sentence? He said, the nuns knew how to write. Get me a nun to write this speech. So from that day on, we call it the get me a nun speech. But he was always pretty cool. I mean, you know, if he got mad at you the next day, he forgot about it. He was a good guy. He was, you know, he understood the process.
So just as we wrap up,
Right.
I know you've played squash with some interesting people. When we first started playing, I'll never forget it. You know, you were crushing me. We were at the printing house. You told me you would play with Rick Moranis.
Yeah, well, Rick and I kind of met because we had children in the same school. And as you know, we would just talk and here and there, and he was like the kind of regular guy-ish guy. And when I told him I played squash, he said, yeah, me too. So I would go to the Y and play with him because he lived around the corner from the West Side Y, and I'd go to then, and then I'd take him to a printing house to play down there. And the only thing he didn't like to do was go out to lunch because he got mobbed by moms with baby carriages. We just saw, honey, I shrunk the kids. And Rick didn't want to be recognized, but he looked like in the movies, so you couldn't miss Rick, you know.
Yeah.
And I played with Rick quite a lot. The coolest thing was one time we left the West Side Y, we were on the island outside of Lincoln Center, and I think Adam Sandler walked by, and he knew Adam Sandler really well, so the two of them are standing on the island, and he goes, oh, Doug, meet Adam Sandler. And he goes, you know, we shake hands and this and that, and the three of us are talking. All these people are going by, you know, doing this.
Double take.
Well, they're gawking. because they're going like, wow, two famous people right there. And they're probably going like, who's that other guy? Must be the agent. Rick, one last thing was cool is that Rick never like did that I'm a celebrity crap, you know? One time where he was dropping me off at home and he makes the illegal left turn onto Riverside Drive, and there's a cop there stopping everybody from making it's a no left turn everywhere, and he makes this left turn and he pulls over, and it's a trap. They got all the cars lined up and they're writing tickets. It's a payday for the city. They take Rick's license. The guy comes back and he's looking at, oh, it's Rick Moranis. Oh, and he goes like, oh yeah, my son loves all your movies and blah 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 and all this. And he goes, what were you doing making a left with 3 signs? And he goes, officer, dumb as a stump, just write me the ticket, you know? And he goes, Rick, don't do that again. And he let him go. And he goes, I hate when they do that. And I go, what do you mean you hate when they do that? If you weren't Rick Moranis, you'd be paying the city $85. So that, you know, but that was a good Rick story.
What advice would you give to someone who is beginning to play squash? What would you say to them about the sport and about how they should think about it?
I just talked to somebody in the locker room who started the sport at 52, and he said he was gung ho, and he said, do you know what the top 2 sports are for losing, for fitness and this and that? And before I go swimming and squash, he goes, how did you know? I said, I did all that years ago. Okay, so my first piece of advice is, if you're in it for fitness, play a lot. You're gonna get fit. If you're into it to try and really improve and get to that next level, and this is painful, but not only take lessons, but it's what you do in between the lessons. You gotta drill a lot. Drilling is boring. I hate drilling. You're not supposed to like drilling. Drilling is about muscle memory and learning how to groove a swing. Get out on the court as much as you can by yourself, warm up the ball, and drill.
Doug, thank you so much. Michael,
you got to do it.
Let's go drill.